Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Roots of Faith. In today's episode, I have Byzantine Catholic priest and historian, Father Christopher Zugger. Father, how are you doing?
Very well. Thank you for having me on. How are you?
Very good, very good. In today's video, we're actually going to be discussing the history of the Byzantine Catholic Church, but a little bit of church history in general. So where do we begin, Father, with
where do you want to begin? Do you want to begin with how they were formed or what happened that caused them to be formed?
Can we begin with the term uniate?
Oy, my least favorite word in the English language, uniate. U-N-I-A-T-E. So when...
Actually, before you say that...
All right, now you got to edit this.
Yeah, I used to help with the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Byzantine Catholic Church page. And when we started doing content and I was uploading content for you guys, we would do some videos of the liturgy, some interview stuff with you. And the content did really, really well. Some of the videos did like millions of views. And I just kept seeing that in the comments. Oh, these guys are uniates. And I was like, what is that? Like, why do they keep calling you that? But they were saying it in a derogatory manner. So I knew it wasn't pleasant. And so I was like, I don't know what that is.
So uniate is from the word unia, the Latin word unia, which means union. So uniati in Eastern Europe were people that accepted the unia, the union. Why Latin? Because in Austria-Hungary, where a lot of this took place, Latin was the official language of the empire because the empire had something like 23 nationalities, each with their own language, of course, and multiple dialects, and Latin was a neutral language. All right, so that's one thing. So churches, the goal of the Holy See originally was hoping for corporate reunion, restoration of the union between Rome, Constantinople, Moscow, and the various churches in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Now, there was never a successful corporate reunion. That's one thing to understand. That was never really, to chisel out sections wasn't the original strategy. The original strategy for the Holy See, and to be honest, for Constantinople, in the 1300s, early 1400s, was corporate reunion. And so there was a council held at Lyon in the 13th century, and then the famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, Council of Florence Ferrara in 1439. Constantinople fell to the Turks in 1453. The patriarch then comes under the power of the Sultan. So when different sections of Orthodoxy start pushing for union with the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church in Poland, Lithuania, and in Austria-Hungary also is open to reunion. It was never corporate. But because they become united, the original word was uniate. So the word in Austria-Hungary and the word in Poland and Lithuania was to say that they were uniates because, again, Latin. All right, and Latin was used even in the academy, the Orthodox Academy in Kiev. All right, Latin was much more widespread than just in the Roman Catholic Church. So uniate, originally, that's all it meant. An Eastern Christian who accepted the union or was born into a united community. But it really takes on a disparaging tone.
When did this take place? When those efforts
So the first big union in Poland, Lithuania is 1596. And in the Union of Brest, Litovsk. And on the eastern side, the goal for the Orthodox that were uniting with Rome was that everything was supposed to stay the same. Nothing was to be changed. Nothing. Liturgically, saints' days, clerical, marriage, customs, practices. It's very detailed. In Austria-Hungary, in the Austrian Empire, the next union is 1646, which is ours, Ruthenian. So that's the Union of Brest, which was not very detailed, which was a mistake. And then after that, they have a larger one for my church in 1652. And then the last one is in 1720. So we're the only ones that you have a corporate reunion for the Ruthenian church. In the Ukrainian and Belarusian and in the Romanians, it's part of the churches. And so uniate is still used academically in Europe, but it really shouldn't be, but they do. It's used commonly in media in Europe and in academic dissertations and books. They'll say uniate all the time. But now, see, it took on a totally negative thing. Because why? Because a lot of the Eastern Catholics started Latinizing, bringing in Latin practices to look Catholic. And the reason they did that was because they were not being fully accepted by the Roman Catholic majority. And so then the Empress Maria Theresa of the Austrian Empire, she comes up with the phrase Greek Catholic. So if you go among ordinary people in Eastern Europe today, and they say, what religion are you? Which would happen to me all the time going over there as an American. They wanted to know what I was. And I would say Greco-Katolicki, that I'm Greek Catholic. And everybody knew exactly where I fit in then, right? But the Orthodox nobility that united with Rome in Poland and Lithuania almost entirely passed over to the Latin Rite. So it really became a religion of servants, peasants, small businessmen, of middle class and lower class people, working class people. So Greek Catholic is the better phrase to use. And over there, if you say uniate, that's really not acceptable. Because uniate now is used in Orthodox anti-Catholic propaganda.
Right.
Right? So that's a lot of information to a short question. Sorry, but I do that all the time.
So you're saying Greek Catholic is a more appropriate term. So even this parish right here, you could appropriately say it's Greek Catholic?
The people in our parish who come from Europe, they all say that they're Greek Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's particularly Ruthenian, right? Or how does that work?
No, it's pretty much any Catholic who's following the Byzantine tradition is considered Greek Catholic. So Melkites, who are generally Arab, Lebanese, Syriac, are Greek Catholic. Anybody who's following the Byzantine Rite is Greek Catholic. Why? Because the Rite came from the Greeks in Constantinople. The Rite was originally from Antioch, in the Greek-speaking Antioch, and really develops in the Church of Constantinople. So any Catholic who belongs to a church that is following the Byzantine Rite would be Greek Catholic.
And where does the distinction of Ruthenian come in? Because that term is used a lot here.
Yes, so our church comes out of Eastern Slovakia, Northern Hungary, and the Transcarpathian district of Ukraine, and the Maramuresh district of Romania. So it was and then colonists who were recruited to fill in the vacant lands after the Ottoman Empire is slowly pushed back out of Europe. And a lot of Ruthenian colonists were recruited to come into these territories that had been devastated by war. So we also have eparchies in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Serbia, and Croatia, and some parishes in Slovenia. So it's a very mixed church. It's unusual for Eastern churches, that we're so diverse and so widespread geographically in the original territory.
So where do we first start seeing a union happening? So when do we first start seeing after the schism that Eastern Orthodox groups coming back into communion with Rome?
So there were small Armenian communities in what is now Turkey. There were the Chaldeans coming out of the Assyrian Church of the East in modern Iraq and Iran. But for Orthodox, it really is what I spoke of earlier: Poland, Lithuania, and the Austrian Empire.
So
that's where you really see
taking
it
place
happen.
in 15th century?
1596 through the 1600s and the 1700s. And both of them expand through that time frame. Pretty much stops in the 1700s. on a large scale. It's already recognized by Rome, by the Holy See, that this is not a good, lasting policy, right? Because there's too many problems associated with it. Prejudice by the Latins, prejudice, of course, by the Orthodox, who see it as, chiseling out, weakening their churches in the face of the Ottoman onslaught, real hostility from the Russians. So, but the unions really do expand pretty far north. They go out into what is now southern Latvia. So it really went all the way into southern and eastern Latvia and all the way down through Romania and into Serbia.
Were there any Eastern groups that never really broke communion with Rome?
Right. So the parishes in Italy and Sicily that followed the Byzantine Rite, they never broke union with Rome. They were always, with the Holy See. And so that's the Italo-Albanians and the Italo-Greeks. So those two communities, which now have two eparchies, one in Sicily and one in southern Italy. The Maronites in Lebanon, when the Crusaders came, and they all had the big cross on their shields and on their uniforms. The Maronites came out of Mount Lebanon and were so excited because they'd been isolated for a couple hundred years by that point. And one of the first things they asked was, who's the Pope? They had their own patriarch that they'd been electing all along, but that was one of the first questions when they, because these guys were Christians. And he said, who's Pope in Rome?
Wow.
So I found that fascinating.
Why were they so isolated to begin with? Was it
they're surrounded by
Muslims?
Turkish armies,
okay,
and they had retreated into the Mount Lebanon region, and that was their stronghold, and that's how Lebanon eventually got formed.
What was the time period like?
So you're talking that the Crusaders get up there is in the 11th century.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So they've been isolated for a while. And and then another interesting thing was when the Portuguese got to India, the Christians of the Kerala region that follow the Syriac rite, they asked, who's Pope in Rome? They had they had no communication with Italy at all. They had communication still with, their fellow Christians in the Near East. But it was interesting, They realized that was a focal point of unity,
right?
And so who's the Pope?
How true is this? Because I've heard this from Eastern Orthodox, where they express that historically, and it's part of the reason why they don't take kindly to Byzantine Catholics, that historically there was a political movement in which the Pope set up rival churches in proximity to Eastern Orthodox churches that look identical, except they were in communion with Rome, and it was kind of used as an opportunity to poach those people to come into communion with Rome, and also there was more like incentives for people to come back with Rome, like perhaps financial incentives for the bishops, or how true is any of that stuff? Like I've heard that quite a bit.
Yeah, and the Jesuits get blamed for a lot of this too. That the Jesuits were, inducing Orthodox to become Catholic. So if you look at the history that we started with, there's movements for union. Why? There are what we would call secular motives, okay? The increase in education in Poland, Lithuania, and the Austrian Empire, these schools were not accessible generally to Orthodox students because they were run by Catholic religious orders, and they really wanted that. With the Counter-Reformation or the Catholic Reformation, whichever you call it, of the late 1500s, where lots of religious are active in Poland and Lithuania. We look at Poland and Lithuania as very Catholic countries today, but at that point, large portions were Protestant, and the nobility was heavily Protestant. And in Hungary, the nobility was heavily Protestant. So in order to bring people back into the Roman Catholic Church from Calvinism and Lutheranism, the Catholic Church had to do serious educational work, serious evangelization. With that, the Orthodox people in those two empires are seeing the quality of education that is not accessible to them. Scripture studies, theological studies. Priests wanted this for their sons. In lots of places, their theological education was limited to knowing Church Slavonic and reading approved sermons from a published book. And being able to do the sacraments and the liturgy. And here, there's a whole new world opening up to them of geography, of theology, of scripture studies, of patristics, of scientific knowledge. And they want in on that. So that's a real reason when you go back to archives. That's a big reason for people to become Catholic without rejecting their spiritual heritage and, in fact, learning more about their spiritual heritage. Because now Greek is accessible. Now Latin is accessible in reading the Fathers. So that is a very valid thing. And in the Austrian Empire, they wanted schools for their children in general, not just the priests' sons, but children in general. So there's publishing. All right, that's one of the big things of the Protestant Reformation, publishing. And the Orthodox Church, because the headquarters were under Turkish authority and Turkish rule, simply could not provide. Like the Ruthenian Church was part of the Patriarchate of Constantinople. They simply couldn't provide anything. Because the Orthodox Church in the Ottoman Empire is right now focused on surviving. They have to survive daily constant pressure from Islam. They have to survive jizya taxes. They have to survive corruption. They have to survive this constant push, to convert. And they have to survive the Janissaries who would come and kidnap children and raise them as Muslims, as Muslim soldiers. So that's their emphasis was there, all right? So you have that. Now, politically, in Poland, Lithuania, and Austrian Empire, bishops sat in the upper house of parliament in Vienna, in Austria, and also in Warsaw and the Sejm, if they were Catholic. I don't think the Orthodox bishops had a seat. So if you were Catholic, you had more. You could have more pull, all right, for your people. All right, you could advocate for your people better. Income, I'll tell you what. Truthfully, Ruthenian priests did not have an income increase at all. In fact, they became poorer because Roman Catholic deans would steal their money in defiance of the emperor. Imperial edicts were passed constantly defending the Ruthenian priests, and they were ignored routinely. The Bishop of Eger in particular and his priests were notorious for this, impoverishing the married clergy. And there was pressure in Poland, Lithuania, and in Austria. There was pressure from the Jesuits that once people became Greek Catholic or uniate Catholic, you want to be really Catholic, you got to be Roman Catholic. And that's how the nobility was lost. The vast majority of the nobility in Poland, Lithuania that became Catholic became Roman Catholic. Metropolitan Andrzej Szybczycki is probably one of the greatest leaders of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in its entire history. And he came back, he and his brother came back to their ancestral church. His mother and father had to get a dispensation to receive Holy Communion at his ordination liturgy because they were still Latin. And at that time, Latin Catholics could not receive in the Eastern churches and vice versa. So it just shows. What it shows to me, all right, having studied this for the last 20 years and reading archival material, is while there may have been secular inducements, and there were, and secular pressure, and there was, at the grassroots level, these people really did believe in the ideal of a reunited church. Because if I was a priest who didn't believe that. And I was treated that poorly by Roman Catholic bishops and Roman Catholic landlords, and they would do terrible things to them, trying to push them to become Latin. And, you had to believe in the vision of a reunited church in order to stay in that. Now, people might say, but in the Austrian Empire, what alternative did they have? They actually did have an alternative. They actually did get priests up until 1720. There were priests coming from the Serbian Orthodox Patriarch. Men would go south and get ordained and come back. But after the union in Matamoros, that no longer happened. And Orthodoxy died out then. There were no more Orthodox clergy serving after 1720 because the last of the priests in Matamoros signed that union. But there was Romania still. There was still a Romanian church that you could go to. So there were options. And there was a push in the late 1600s to return to Orthodoxy because of the treatment people got. Conversely, in Poland, Lithuania, gradually the brotherhoods in Lviv, which was the last big holdout, became Catholic. But again, why? After 1632, you could remain Orthodox. And there were Orthodox bishops seated in the Sejm in Warsaw. The Orthodox Church was legalized again in Poland, Lithuania after the big uprising. So you could leave and become Orthodox. The fact that people stayed, says a lot.
I interviewed a Russian Orthodox woman that grew up in Poland, and this wasn't that long ago. So within the past, 50, 60 years, she said that growing up in Poland, she didn't have the same opportunities as the Catholics because she was Orthodox, meaning that she couldn't get certain jobs or she didn't have certain, she couldn't get into college and that kind of thing. So do you think some of it still kind of lingers,
before World War II, the second and third largest churches in Poland were the Greek Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox. After the war, Poland lost a third of the country, and that's where most of the Orthodox lived. Because of that, the Orthodox were reduced, right, sharply, and the Greek Catholics also, to 1%. And so you have this, Poland suddenly, after 1945, goes from being, I'm going to say 75% Catholic, Roman Catholic, to 98% Roman Catholic, at least baptized, with a communist government that was hostile to all religion. And Orthodox then they definitely have a tougher time of it then, and because they're not known. And Greek Catholics had a tougher time of it. They were scattered by the government all over the country. They were deported from their homes, in boxcars and just shunted all over into eastern and northern Poland. And a lot of the Orthodox got caught up in that too. So they're sent to territories where Orthodox or Greek Catholics simply were not known. And there was definite prejudice against Orthodox on the part of Roman Catholics. So if you had Roman Catholics, somebody who was fervently Roman Catholic and in a position of authority, I would believe that, that she would have a tougher time. If she was in the Białystok region in the northeast, she would have had an easier time of it because the majority of the people there were Orthodox. But if you were in central Poland, or the east or the north, she would have had a tough time, I think. And that's really unfortunate. It's so sad, And it's just terrible what was done to Poland after World War II. We abandoned the Poles who were the first victims of World War II, and we abandoned the 3 Baltic states at Yalta. FDR and Churchill signed off Eastern Europe to Stalin, and those people have suffered ever since. So, and now, again, with this war, yeesh.
So there is technically some validity to their frustration to the Orthodox, in general, when they speak on the Byzantine Catholics kind of being a soft spot for them because they've
a sore spot.
Yeah.
I would say But, when you go back in the history over there lingers a lot longer than it does in the West. Mm-hmm. People will bring up, first thing Pope John Paul II did when he went to Greece was to apologize for the Fourth Crusade of 1204. 700, almost 800 years prior? Seriously? Yeah, he did have to, because that was the memory of it. Although the Vatican had nothing to do with it, the memory of it and the damage it did to the Eastern Roman Empire and the permanent weakening it created of the empire, and therefore accelerated its collapse to the Turks, was very alive. It's very alive. Now, flip it. Flip side, for Greek Catholics in Eastern Europe, Orthodoxy is a sore spot. Why? Because after World War II, the Russian Orthodox Church collaborated with the Stalinist government in destroying our churches, in betraying priests that were hidden, in forcing people to receive sacraments, sometimes at gunpoint. In the Diocese of Helm in 1870, people were dragged to church and forced to receive communion from an Orthodox priest at bayonets pointed at their throats. And it was the same thing was repeated under communism. Our churches were suddenly Orthodox, the parish churches, the bishops were all arrested, all suffered terribly. In the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, they all died in prison or in labor camps, with the exception of Joseph Slipier, who was exiled to the West at the request of John the 23rd, after he helped negotiate the Cuban Missile Crisis to an end. Otherwise, he would have died there too. So the Greek Catholics have apologized for things that were done wrong. The Roman Catholics have apologized for things that were done wrong. The Orthodox have not apologized. There's no Orthodox patriarch in Romania or Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia, or Poland, or Russia. And the Russian Patriarchate controlled the church in Czechoslovakia and the church in Poland. No one has apologized for what was done to the Greek Catholics in forcing these people to become Orthodox overnight. No one has apologized for collaborating with Stalin of all people. And that's wrong. We apologize. We say, yes, there were various inducements, historical mistakes, historical errors. I have never heard an Orthodox bishop apologize for what was done to the Greek Catholic population.
What distinction can we make between civil authorities and the church? So I know that people want to kind of get into that.
People talk about in Eastern Roman Empire there was this symphony between church and state. Really, look at the history. Look at the emperors. There were some really bad emperors. There were emperors who were heretics. There were emperors who persecuted the church. There were emperors who deposed patriarchs. There were patriarchs who were thrown into prison because they wouldn't go along with an emperor. And in Constantinople itself, as well as Antioch and Alexandria. So whenever there's a union between altar and throne, I always say this in classes, when there's a union between altar and throne, altar loses. Look at the Russian Empire. When you have a church operating as a state church, its intensity and fervor of faith declines. In England, 2% of Anglicans go to church now. 98% stay home on Sunday. In the Russian Empire, the church was weak. It flared up in great fervor with persecution by the communists. But it was weak. The upper classes barely went to church. They barely kept the fasts. So when you have that civil authority, who are you going to choose? We always have to choose religious authority as Christians. We must.
Well, the reason I asked that is because we can point to the massacre of the Latins, that took place
1182. Yeah.
And, as Catholics, we hear, well, they haven't apologized for that. Did the church back that?
No, that was I don't think the Patriarchate was involved in killing these people. Gosh. You know, that was an economic thing because certain Latin parishes and certain Latin neighborhoods were spared. The Latins, it's an interesting thing to bring up because everybody says the schism takes place in 1054, which it really doesn't. So in 1182, Constantinople has all these Latin churches and monasteries and convents and neighborhoods, which says, and people were going back and forth, all right? Greeks were going to Latin churches for confession. Latins were going to Greek churches for confession. They went to Holy Communion many times in each other's churches. So that shows that the schism had not hardened whatsoever. All right, and it's, I can't remember now which it was, but there's Venetians and there's Genoans, all right, in the city, as well as people from Pisa and Amalfi. And it's only people from certain Italian city-states that get killed because it's an economic and political. What they did was atrocious, though. It is an atrocity. That's where the word comes from, an atrocity, because churches were vandalized and people were slaughtered. But we do not have an actual eyewitness account in Greek or Latin. We have accounts from Central Europe, from Germany, and accounts that are written years later. Well, by then it's highly inflated because the political tensions are also between the Holy Roman Empire and between the Italian states and the Eastern Roman Empire are stoked higher. And so you have these very lurid descriptions of what supposedly happened, but it's not written by anybody who was there. There's nothing from anybody who was there from either side, which is really curious. So it says to me that it's not as big as what it later was made out to be. All right, and the fact that in 1183, you have Latin churches and monasteries and convents and neighborhoods still there. So they didn't wipe everybody out. It was not a good thing. Obviously, killing people is never a good thing. Vandalizing a church is never a good thing. But it wasn't on the scale that later propaganda made it out to be.
But do you think it fueled the reason why the sack of Constantinople took place in 1204? 1204, right?
1204, yeah. Well, the sack of Constantinople, again, very complicated. The army owed money to Venice. The Venetians were backing a pretender to the throne. We'll wipe out the debt if you attack the city and put him on the throne. That's basically what happened. And what they did in the sack of the city was so horrendous and on a much bigger scale than 1182, because it's the whole city, that Pope Innocent III said the Greeks will never reunite with us again after this, when he got the eyewitness accounts. And he excommunicated them for going to Constantinople in the first place. So they weren't even Catholics in good standing. They were excommunicated.
So the Vatican was not at all involved in that?
No.
The Pope did not back that at all or condone?
Nothing. No.
Okay.
No.
Wow.
Venice profited greatly. The 4 horses on St. Mark's are from the Hippodrome racing track. And lots of things were looted from the city. Lots of relics. Lots of beautiful art was looted. But the damage was horrendous. So.
But what probably made it worse was that didn't the Pope take advantage of that in a sense by installing a Latin
So
patriarch?
later on, yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. They had the Latin patriarch. And Latin bishops were of higher status than the Greek bishops. And Latin, how does this go? Now, I got to be accurate. That Latin bishops were installed in the islands in the Aegean Sea and over Greece itself, and the patriarch in Constantinople. It was ridiculous. And the Greek patriarch had to flee to the new empire of Trebizond, which was just barely hanging on along the Black Sea coast. And you just look back at it and you say, well, the things Christians do to one another, God must sit in heaven and weep over us. The stupid things we do and the stupid ways we separate ourselves from one another. Terrible.
So much ego that has caused. And it sucks because the lay people have nothing to do with it. Like the lay people,
right?
They're the ones suffering at the hands of what the bishops.
But an interesting thing is that you have edicts from the Fanar, the Orthodox version of the Vatican, in Constantinople in the 1700s, forbidding the faithful and priests from going to confession to Latin priests and forbidding them from going to Holy Communion in Latin churches. You never forbid anything unless it's happening. So at the local level of the ordinary people, in spite of all that, the ordinary people are saying, well, we believe the exact same things. What is the problem? And then when the Orthodox decrees come out in the early 1700s, that's when you get Catholic decrees telling the Latins in the islands and Greece to stop going for confession and communion.
That's
and
way
married
later.
In Greek churches. Yeah, so it's very late. Yeah,
but do you think part of it...
500 years after the sack of Constantinople.
Does part of it have to do with the fact that word hasn't reached those areas?
Oh, no,
or
they knew very well what
they
was going
knew
on.
and they just said, you know what, we're just going to kind of be in the middle.
They lived
or
next
just...
door to one another. They're mixed together. Same thing in the Near East, in Syria and Lebanon. You have, within families, I find it fascinating that in families that they can keep track of who's Melkite, who's Maronite, who's Latin, who's Greek Orthodox. It's just, they do it, and they keep it. They keep everything according to the canons. And at the same time, it's George's wedding, let's go to,
Yeah.
So, my aunt, she always loved that priest, let's go. So,
So even in like the 13th century, I believe, on Mount Athos, they had Benedictine spirituality.
There was a Benedictine monastery.
Yeah.
Now, there's a controversy over that, in that some Orthodox sources say that they had accepted Orthodoxy, whereas there are other Orthodox and Latin sources that say, no, they remained a Benedictine monastery that was Catholic. Some say that, they remained Benedictine but were Orthodox. Well, they're all dead, and there's not much documentation. But it was from the city-state of Amalfi, which was one of the prosperous city-states that did a lot of trade with the Greeks. And that's how they got founded. But the interesting thing is that when the monastery is founded, they were accepted. The fact there was no army marching onto Mount Athos demanding that a Latin monastery be opened. They went there, and they built a nice monastery, and part of it is still standing. So,
I know I'm kind of flip-flopping on a bunch of timelines, but when we look at the Council of Ferrara, Florence, when that took place and the bishop signed off, and then they later took it back, right? On that council. What is your appraisal of that situation? And also, what are your thoughts on like St. Mark of Ephesus? Is that somebody that you would hold dearly in your heart as a saint, or just kind of like, what's your opinion on him?
So the scroll of Mark of Ephesus, when he, in his icons, it says, beware of the teachings of the Latins. So that's going to be a hard one to reconcile with Catholics, because he didn't like Catholics.
Yeah.
So whatever is going to happen with devotion to him in a reunited church is going to be fascinating. Yeah, he's the only one of the bishops that did not sign the final decrees in Ferrara. The council started in Florence, and they had to move to Ferrara because of the plague. An outbreak of the plague. If you read I can't remember the author of this history that I read of the Council of Florence.
I think it was the other way around, right? It started in Ferrara, and then
maybe it started in Ferrara and moved to Florence.
I think so, if I'm not mistaken.
So either way, when they weren't treated well, because the Pope and the Latin cardinals and bishops knew that the Eastern Romans, the Byzantines, were in trouble. The empire had shrunk dramatically. The Turks were behind the city in Europe already. They had already cut them off from Adrianople, as well as coming in from Anatolia, and they were in tough straits, and so they weren't treated well. So it's not a good example. They had to kiss the Pope's foot because there's crosses on the Pope's slippers at that time. So they're supposed to kiss the cross, but in the East, of course, to kiss the foot is very insulting. And they knew that. And one of the biggest problems they had was language. They only had a couple theologians on the Latin side who spoke Greek, and only a couple on the Orthodox side who spoke Latin. That's one of the big problems. So are you asking, is it a model for reunion? Or
No, just getting your thoughts on it in general, as coming from a Byzantine Catholic perspective.
it was high hopes that didn't pan out. I think they tried to come up with a good compromise on the filioque in that they were using Gregory of Nyssa, that the Spirit proceeds from the Father through the Son. And that's something that's got to get resolved. That has got to get resolved. And that seemed to be acceptable, really, in their discussions on the Greek side through the Son, especially because it's Gregory of Nyssa. And there were other fathers, Latin and Greek, that had held to that. So that's an important thing.
Like St. Maximus.
And Maximus,
Yeah.
Right. And there's also something in there very clear about purgatory, that the souls in purgatory are not cleansed by fire, and that fire is not supposed to be depicted in depictions of purgatory. But see, this is where councils don't make it down to the local level, because you look at any picture of Our Lady of Mount Carmel with relieving the souls in purgatory, they're always in fire. And that's very popular. It's that fire art in art, has endured down to this day, which is bad, because fire is supposed to be for the fire of Gehenna, not being pure. You're being purified of your sins. So I'm trying to think of something else from Florence. And that they were supposed to be treated equally, that the Greeks and Latins in a reunited church would be equal. And that's the thing also. That was tough, because even in Rome itself, in the Greek college, they only had to go to communion in their own right, in their own ritual church a few times a year. The rest of the year, they could go to a Latin church, which just leads to Latinization spiritually, theologically, and artistically, and liturgically, and which is what you don't want. So, no, it's not. It's not. It's not a good model. And it was refuted. By the time they got back, the bulk of the people rejected it. The only Catholic liturgies, Eastern Catholic, Byzantine Catholic, uniate, whatever word you want to use, that were offered in Constantinople were in Hagia Sophia. And they don't all come together until the day that the city is besieged. So obviously the people had rejected the articles. So, yeah.
Well, I just have a couple more questions before we wrap up here.
You're working me here, boy. You are working me, man. My golly.
You grew up a Byzantine Catholic, right? Your entire life, you grew up as a Byzantine Catholic?
No.
No?
No, you know that.
Really?
Really? You don't know that?
We actually did a video on this, but my memory sucks.
Oh, okay.
What actually happens is when I'm filming, I just don't pay attention.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because you're focused on the camera.
Yeah.
Action.
So, and even when I edit it, I just make sure there's no mistakes, and then I just put it up. So.
No, I grew up Roman Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what made you switch?
I was drawn to icons and chant very early. Very early. I was drawing icons as a kid.
Wow.
Yeah. My family had a big devotion to Our Lady Perpetual Help because of various blessings that had come our way. My grandma, Zugger, had a huge devotion to Our Lady Perpetual Help, which is, of course, an icon. We had that icon in our parish church and the novena on Wednesday nights, and I used to serve that novena. And I just loved icons and Eastern chant. I would get records out of the library, from the public library, and listening to the chant on my own little record player in my room. And I started going to the Byzantine church when it opened. And I just felt, the day I walked into Byzantine Catholic Church, I really heard a voice. I was in the vestibule looking at the bulletins and stuff. And then it had frosted glass doors, so you couldn't see inside from the vestibule to the nave of the church. And I came into the church, and I just heard a voice say, "You're home now." Right in my right ear. You're home now.
Did you ever have a compulsion to become Orthodox at any point?
No.
It never drew you.
I went to a Russian Orthodox church. there's a big Russian Orthodox church in the neighborhood where my dad grew up, and it was a parish that was formed by a mix of Orthodox and Greek Catholics. In the early 1900s, they couldn't get a Greek Catholic priest to come to Buffalo. It's too far from the settlement areas in Jersey and Pennsylvania and so forth. So they compromised and had a Russian Orthodox priest. And I liked it very much, but I knew I couldn't receive the sacraments there. No, I never had a compulsion. And I had Orthodox friends. We had Orthodox friends, and I had Orthodox friends, in high school. But no, I was just, I guess, too dyed in the wool.
Did they ever call you like a uniate and like kind of mess with you like that, or?
No.
No?
No. Well, I mean, I was Roman Catholic then, but then when I switched to Byzantine, they just thought it was fine. Yeah. And what's interesting, in America, a lot of the Slavic Orthodox churches have the word Catholic in their charters and in their cornerstones, because a lot of them were originally Greek Catholic churches. So they have, in their bylaws and stuff, it has the word Catholic. So it gets confusing for people. And so that had to be hammered out a couple times. Well, are you Orthodox Catholic? Are you now Orthodox Greek Catholic, or are you Byzantine Catholic? No, Byzantine Catholic. Oh, okay. So, yeah, it wasn't a big deal. I just really have always had a strong feeling that the role of the Pope is to provide a center of unity. It hasn't always worked out, obviously. And we've had some humdingers of popes, that's for sure. But the mission of the papacy, as the heirs of Peter, is to be Peter for the universal church, for everybody, and that's been important to me, and that's why I was impressed when I realized in my research that these ordinary parish priests who were really being persecuted, they had a much better idea of Catholic unity than the Bishop of Acre did. They knew that they were supposed to be authentically Eastern and serve their people and not give it up. And that says a lot about their understanding of Catholicism as a church that embraces East and West. And that these parish priests and these ordinary farmers and workers, they understood that so much better than the Jesuit theologians of their day. They had a much better vision, and their vision was focused on Petrine service. So I guess that's where I'm at too. Because I've had some people, that didn't treat me very well in the Catholic Church, because especially when they found out I switched from Roman to Byzantine. How could you do such a thing? How could you?
I feel like these days it's probably less of a stigma now, right?
Now it's less of a stigma. But 45, 50 years ago, that was a big deal.
Yeah, I imagine it's something similar to like I do, the Eastern Orthodox content, and I film with Western Rite Orthodox, and they get a lot of heat from Eastern Orthodox, Eastern Rite. Yeah. So I imagine it was probably something similar.
Yeah.
Similar
to that. It was
that.
Fun sometimes.
What about now? Do you have any relationships with like Orthodox priests?
No, I don't know any of the Orthodox priests that are here now. Mm-hmm. And, my health has a lot to do with that I can't get out as easily as I did, when I knew guys before. Mm-hmm. So that's a shame, and our parish doesn't have that connection either anymore with the Orthodox priests. So, and that's unfortunate. But there are parts of the country where they do interact more with one another, where they'll have like an Eastern Christian Association,
right,
as opposed to just Eastern Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. Mm-hmm. And that's very heartening to see.
And there's a lot of financial support, I think, because even here in the gift store, you guys sell from Orthodox companies, and then also when you look at other publications like Eastern Christian publications, it kind of does a little bit of both.
Oh yeah, Jack Fiegel does a great job. Eastern Christian publications. He carries a lot of things from the former Orthodox bishop, the late Orthodox bishop Callistos Ware, And he also publishes things from the Orthodox and for the Orthodox. And that Eastern Christian Publications, that's worth a good look at, because he's done a very good job, and he is now the official liaison between the United States Catholic Conference and the Orthodox Conference of Bishops as a Byzantine Catholic. And that says a lot of where we've come, that the United States Conference could appoint a Byzantine Catholic as the liaison with the Orthodox Conference. So we've come a long way from, before Vatican II.
Speaking of Metropolitan Callistos Ware, I remember when I first started looking into Orthodoxy, and then you, me, and Alex, we went to the Byzantine Symposium in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And on the flight there, I had taken some reading material with me, and I had The Orthodox Way by Metropolitan Callistos Ware. Mm-hmm. And it was around the time that I started, I was kind of doing it like behind the scenes. Like, I didn't even tell Alex at the time that I was looking at Orthodoxy, and I had the book with me, and I told Alex, and I was like, look, I have an Orthodox book. Like, I don't want Father to see it because he might get mad at me. And then I was sitting next to you, and I was like, well, he's going to see me reading it. So I just told you, I said, Father, I have this book that I'm going to read. And you saw that it was Callistos Ware, and you're like, oh, it's Callistos Ware. Like, yeah, read the book. Like, it wasn't like a big deal. Like, it wasn't polemical.
He's a good writer.
Yeah.
He's a good writer. He was a very good bishop and a good priest,
Yeah. But speaking of books, you have quite a few books that you've written.
Mm-hmm.
We'll probably finish up there, wrap up with that. So talk to, let them know where.
Eastern Christian Publications has Finding a Hidden Church, which is the history of our church in the underground in the Soviet Union and the martyrdoms and how they kept the church alive. He also has a history of the Byzantine Catholic Church in the United States, which is exactly what it says. Syracuse University sells, this is my first book. This is going to be funny that I almost forgot it, because the title is The Forgotten, which is Catholics in the Soviet Union from Lenin through Stalin. And you can get that on Amazon. And then Looking to Tomorrow is at Byzantine Seminary Press, which is the whole history of the Ruthenian Church from Cyril and Methodius to today, to the 21st century in Europe and North America. And then I'm trying to finish my history of Catholics in the Soviet Gulag and their faith life in exile and in the labor camps.
And people can also get the history of the Byzantine Catholic Church in America. You were telling me about that?
That's the one at Eastern Christian Publications,
okay.
along with Finding a Hidden Church. Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm gonna link those in the description below. You guys can check them out. Father, I know we could talk about each one of those books. We can probably have hours and hours and hours of conversation. So we'll definitely have to do a follow-up video.
Okay.
So
hopefully
really appreciate it.
Good comments and
well, probably not.
Nice comments.
We probably won't.
You never know. You never know. It's Lent. People have to be charitable.
That's true. We just had Forgiveness Sunday, so
exactly. And this year we're all on it together.
Yeah, that's true.
So the Orthodox and Catholic are on the same timing this year. So
that's
we're
awesome.
all in Lent. We all need to convert. We all need to convert. We all need to convert. Always. We always need conversion.
All right. Well, thank you, Father. Appreciate your time.
Thank you much.
And please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.